Hey guys! My name is Dodovic, a third-year physical therapy student here in the Philippines. For today's video, I will be teaching you about clinical kinesiology. This will be for all the second-year students who have online classes today, and I hope that this will be very helpful to you. I will be using this book, the Brunnstrom's Clinical Kinesiology, 6th edition. So now, without further ado, let's start with the basic concepts in kinesiology. So what comes into your mind whenever you hear the word kines? Kapag kines ba mahirap, nakakatakot, o nakakakaba? That's true. This subject is an upgrade to your anatomy sa first year. It is now the application of your content knowledge sa anatomy. Pero don't worry, kapag natutunan mo ng mahalin ang subject na ito, mamahalin ka din niya pabalik. Now, kapag sinabi po nating kinesiology, it is the study of human motion. The essence of kines or kinesiology is movement. And within the study of kinesiology, there are two terms that we need to define. We have kinetics and kinematics. When we say kinetics, it's more on the forces behind the motion. So these forces produce or resist the motion. While when we say kinematics, it deals with the type of motion without regard to the forces that produce that motion. So it's more on three things: the types of motion, the direction of motion, and the quantity of motion. Now, we will focus more sa kinematics. Erase natin to. Kinematics is further subdivided into two subtopics. We have the Osteokinematics and we also have the Arthrokinematics. Now, when we say osteokinematics, it's more on the bone movement. It's more on the bone movement because ang focus ni osteokinematics ay ang movement of the bony partners or bony segments that make up a joint. While when we say arthrokinematics, it's more on the joint movements. This is more specific than the osteokinematics because the arthrokinematics is the minute movement occurring within the joint or between the joint surfaces. Let's talk about OKC and CKC, or the open kinematic chain and the closed kinematic chain. When we say OKC, it's when the distal bone moves from a fixed proximal bone. So this one, to remember, we have distal bone. While the CKC is when the proximal bone moves from a fixed distal bone. So to remember, it's more on proximal. For example, sa OKC or open kinematic chain, you are flexing your knee joint while sitting. While for the closed kinematic chain, you are standing up from a seated position. However, before we can begin a discussion about osteokinematics and arthrokinematics, I just want to know first if na-remember nyo pa ang planes and axes of motion na needed to understand human movement. Just in case you need to refresh, you can check it on the card above na nauna ko lang na-discuss noon. Now, let's go back po to our topic and let's start with osteokinematics. Best example po ng osteokinematics ay range of motion. ROM is produced by our muscles, like elbow flexion and knee extension. Take note also that osteokinematics occur in one plane of the body. Ano-ano ang mga planes na ito? We have frontal, sagittal, and transverse plane, and it should be around its corresponding axis. Now, we have different types of motion. We have linear or translatory motion and angular or rotary motion. And we will start with linear motion. This type of motion is parallel to an axis. Or in simpler terms, linear motion is a motion that is in the same direction. For example, we have an elevator. For example, this is an elevator going up and down within the elevator shaft. So it follows the axis of the elevator shaft. On the other hand, the angular motion happens in a circle around an axis. For example, we have elbow flexion. So take note also that angular motion has different velocities related to its axis of motion. So this is the axis, the elbow joint. And then elbow flexion will start from here, let's say here to here, and then here. So since it has different velocities, velocities are also expressed in terms of the degree of an angle. So let's say this one here is 145 degree. This one here is 70 degrees. This one here is 30 degrees. So it has different velocities. Therefore, we can say that the farther the distance from the axis of motion, the greater the velocities. So this one is farther from the axis of motion, so it's 145 degrees from here to here. And then this one is 70 degrees because it's getting closer to the axis of motion. And this one is 30 degrees because it's getting closer and closer to the axis of motion. That's the angular motion. Now, how can we apply this to human movement? Remember lang po natin na a combination of linear and angular movement create a functional motion. For example, in walking, at first, iisipin natin na it is just a translatory movement because our trunk and the body as a whole move in forward direction, right? But there's always a plot twist because, fun fact, this forward or translatory movement is produced by the angular movement of our hips, knee, and ankle. Di ba kapag naglalakad tayo, kailangan nating i-flex ang ating hip and then there are also movements from the knee and the ankle? That's it. That's the impact of translatory and angular movement. Now, let's talk about the basic arthrokinematic joint motions, or also known as joint play or accessory motions. So, every time na i-move natin ang ating bony part, or bony partners, or bony segments, nagkakaroon ng joint play. So, meron tayong rolling or rocking. Meron din tayong sliding or gliding and spinning. So, itong tatlo na to usually happens within the joint. Every time na nag-move ka, pwedeng magkaroon ng rolling or rocking, sliding or gliding, and spinning. And then, dito na rin papasok si Convex-concave Rule na laging lumalabas sa exams. Convex-concave unahin na natin ang concave rule. So for example, in elbow flexion, so this is the humerus. Let's say humerus, this is the ulna with the radius. This is the humerus. So this one here is what we call the convex. And this one here is the concave. This is ulna. And this is humerus. So take note, ulna is concave and humerus is convex. Now, sino ang nagmo-move kapag nag-elbow flex ka? Si ulna or si humerus? It's the ulna, right? And then it happens that ulna is concave. So according to this rule, a concave bone moves in the same direction as to the convex bone. Therefore, if you move your elbow into flexion, the concave ulna will move upward to the direction of the humerus. So, ito, papunta siya sa taas, just like the humerus. Again, to remember, it's the same direction. The same direction. Concave bone will move in the same direction as to the convex bone. So, kapag i-bend mo to, ito, upward na papunta sa humerus. Hindi siya pa-downward. The same direction. And now, when we say convex bone, for example, in shoulder abduction, let me draw it first. So, shoulder abduction. This is your humerus. Say, this is your humerus. This is your glenoid fossa. Right. So, this one here is concave. The humeral head of the humerus is convex. So, kapag nag-abduct ka ng shoulder, alin ang nag-move? Si humerus or si glenoid fossa? It's the humerus that moves, right? So, according to this rule, since the humerus has a convex humeral head, it means that a convex bone moves in the opposite direction as to the concave bone. Therefore, if you will move your shoulder into abduction, the humeral head, which is convex, will move opposite to the direction of the glenoid fossa and the humeral shaft. So kapag inabduct mo siya, pupunta yung humeral shaft upward, while your humeral head will move downward. Confusing, right? To help you remember the Convex-concave rule, syempre, hindi mawawala ang ating mnemonics. We have the os-os rule. Os rule. Meaning opposite, same, and opposite. Opposite sa shoulder, same sa elbow, opposite sa wrist. Opposite sa hips, same sa knee, opposite sa ankle. Ganun lang kasimple. Opposite, same, opposite. And then opposite, same, opposite. But here is an important question. Paano naman kapag CKC or closed kinematic chain? Remember, kapag CKC, hindi na siya the same. For example, sa knee. So this one is the femur, this one is the tibia. So the femur is convex, and then the tibia is concave. Now, since CKC, ibig sabihin, nakastabilize ang distal bone, which is the tibia. So the one who will move will be the proximal bone, which is the femur. If you stabilize the tibia and allow the femur to move so that it moves into flexion like squat, so what will happen is that this convex femur will move opposite to the direction or will glide opposite to the direction of the femoral shaft. So, opposite na siya kasi convex na. Pero kapag OKC, same. Kasi ito ang mag-move, ang concave tibia. Now, we have joint mobilization rule that you should never forget. The direction of joint mobilization is opposite to the direction of the restricted movement. If you still have questions about this topic, you can comment down below. Now, let's proceed to the next chapter of our book. How do you define the word force? When you say force, it has something to do with a push or pull that produces displacement. And then it also has two dimensions. We have magnitude and direction. For example, an applied force has 5 pounds magnitude or quantity and an upward direction when lifting an object overhead. It has also 4 types. We have gravity, muscles, externally applied resistance, and friction. For gravity, here are the important things to remember. Our center of gravity, for adults, we have slightly anterior to S2. That's for adults. For children, it's at the T12. And then, for our line of gravity, it follows atat paa as our mnemonics. And then for our base of support, it should be 2 to 4 inches. It should be wider, closer to the center of gravity, and of course, the line of gravity should be within the base of support. Next, we have muscles. So we have muscles. When we say eccentric, it's lengthening of the muscles. When we say concentric, it's shortening of the muscles. And when we say isometric, it's when it stays the same. We also have different muscle functions. We have agonist, antagonist, and synergist, which you can find on the card above if you haven't watched my previous vlog. And then we have 2 types of muscle insufficiencies. We have active insufficiency and passive insufficiency. Active insufficiency follows or goes along with the action of the muscles. It is shortened and it only applies to multi-jointed muscles. For example, we have knee flexion and plantar flexion. But here's the twist. You have to comment below the answer kung anong muscle ito under active insufficiency. Again, knee flexion and plantar flexion. Those who will get the correct answer will be picked as the comments of the day. Next, we also have passive insufficiency. This one is opposite or against the action of the muscle. It is super lengthened to the point that there is no possible movement to occur. For example, hip flexion and knee extension is opposite to the action of the hamstrings. Therefore, it is passive insufficiency of the hamstrings. Next, we have levers. So, lever is a simple machine consists of a rigid bar that rotates around an axis or a fulcrum. So it has 3 elements: an axis, force arm, and resistance arm. In our body, the body segments or the bony partners, for example, in elbow flexion, the bony partners act as the levers, while the joint act as the axis. The external forces acting on the body are resistance force, while the internal forces are our muscles. Confusing, right? Of course, hindi dapat mawala ang ating mnemonics. So we have 3 types of lever. So remember this, we have first type, second type, and third type of lever. So we have far, arf, afar or afir. So where F stands for force arm, A for axis, and R for resistance. And then this one is for BPI. When you say BPI, balance, power. So this one, to remember, let's make it is speed. Don't mind the I, basta is speed yan siya. So again, for the first type of lever, we have far. So if you're gonna draw it, this one here is the axis. Thus, the force is going downward, the resistance is going downward. Force and resistance. Now, for the second type of lever, we have a far. So the fulcrum of the arm or the axis is here, and then the resistance is going downward, that's resistance, and the force is going upward. This one is the force. Afar. Afar, arf. Then this one here, for afar, the axis is here, then the force is at the middle, going upward, resistance is at the end, going downward. That's it. Example of the first type of lever is head flexion, where the head serves as the resistance and it is balanced by the neck extensor muscle force. Example of the second type of lever is plantar flexion, where the axis is at the metatarsal joint, most commonly at the first and second metatarsal joint, and then the force coming from the gastrocsoleus muscle, and then the resistance comes from the gravity of the earth. And then lastly, the third type of lever, which is the most common type of lever, our example to that is elbow flexion. So our axis is at the elbow joint, and then our force comes from the biceps brachii muscle, and our resistance is coming from the dumbbell at the hand. By the way, guys, if you want me to post another episode as a continuation to the topics we discussed here, please help me reach 1,000 likes for this video. You can share this to your friends, classmates, seniors, family members, and colleagues. And of course, please don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, turn on the notification bell, and watch until the end of this video. That's it, guys. Our discussion ends here today. Thank you for watching.